Again, the good albums keep coming! Hi everyone, Good Music Tano here, the internet's busiest music nerd. And it's time for a review of the new Armand Hammer, Paraffin. This is the latest full-length album from New York hip-hop duo Elucid and Billy Woods, aka Armand Hammer. I first covered the duo back in 2015 when they dropped their debut album, Race Music. I enjoyed the project's abstract, heavy production, and very grim, cryptic lyricism from two of the East Coast's most unique rappers right now. Their follow-up album a few years later, Rome, I found to be a little underwhelming. An album that was much rawer than their debut, with a lot of the production taking on a lo-fi tone with some very repetitive loops. It felt like there was less lyrical and vocal impact on the album overall in comparison with the last record. To me, it was almost as if Billy and Elucid were on autopilot just a little bit for this one. As each of them dropped sizable solo projects within this same span of time, so I'm not sure if that stretched things thin a little bit. As someone who's consistently been a fan of Armand Hammer and Billy Woods, pretty much anything that dude touches, the record brought a lot of the same qualities and characteristics that I enjoyed about Armand Hammer's previous work, but I just failed to see the album as the duo making a significant improvement on their sound. But now that I'm hearing this new album, it feels almost as if Rome was laying the groundwork for the grimy, dirty, grim, and psychedelic avenues that Armand Hammer take their songs down here. Tracks like the boomy and abyssal Rehearse with Ornette are bold standouts because there's all this intense feedback woven into the beat. It's incredibly eerie. Then there's these ethereal jazz loops on the song Dettol. The jazz sampling on this cut adds a sour, dramatic tone to the weird mix of sentimental, dark, and tragic bars on the cut. Then there's the nightmarish FUHRMAN tapes, whose instrumental is so frightening I really can't even start to describe it accurately. Not to mention there are some genius beat switches on this album too, like the roaring rock guitars that bust in suddenly at the end of If He Holla. Meanwhile, the first leg of the track is painted with these really faint, what sounds like nu metal samples or something, or a metalcore breakdown. I'm not sure. It's really buried into the beat, but adds a perfect amount of very subtle texture. Then there's the jazzy flute hits and woozy electric pianos that suddenly pop in on alternate side parking, which is absolutely eargasmic. The moment that transition happens, it's like time just slows down. Overall, the production on this thing is fantastic. It sounds very much in tribute to some of the best underground hip-hop artists and acts of the late 90s and the 2000s. You know, we're talking Def Jux and Stone's Throw, MF Doom, Madlib, that sort of thing. LP as well, but I would say that Armand Hammer and their producers take it a step further. Because these beats, they're textured, they're heavy, they're lazy, they're groovy. But sometimes they're also glitching out, or they are soaked and treated in these psychedelic delays and distortions and filters, which works really well for Elucid and Billy Woods' respective cerebral lyrical styles. And there are a lot of amazing and esoteric samples littered throughout this thing too, many of which are methodically treated and manipulated, chopped up, so placing their origin sometimes can be difficult. If you have listened to Elucid or Billy Woods or Armand Hammer before, there are some familiar faces on the production end of this thing like Kenny Siegel and Willie Green. Elucid also handles quite a few of the beats on this thing too. I will say though, Elucid and Billy sometimes are throwing in everything but the kitchen sink on these beats, and it does drown out some of the vocals on a couple of tracks here, take away from that lyrical impact, but still, they do bring a strong sonic vibe, because lyrically and sonically, a lot of these songs sound like they're coming straight out of a hip-hop Twilight Zone, where Billy Woods and Elucid are processing some serious mental demons, some PTSD, paranoia as well. Elucid and Woods also have quite a bit of lyrical chemistry on this album, certainly much more than they presented on Rome, as it felt like they were kind of separate on that record. Here, though, they're kind of reinforcing one another topically on tracks like No Days Off, which is very much a track about economic struggles, or even trading bars and little mini verses back and forth with each other on a track here and there. But for the most part, each artist's verses on this record don't necessarily add up into a super clear narrative. A lot of what they are spitting is a lot of non sequitur stuff, tangent stuff, but consistently it's pretty slick, cleverly worded, and despondent. And on the macro level, I think the album does paint a lyrical portrait of what happens to people who live on the fringes of society, who slip through the cracks of a callous America. I think a bar from Billy Woods at the end of the track If He Holla kind of encapsulates the lyrical tone of both him and Elucid's verses throughout a great deal of the album, and that is off message even when I'm on topic. Collectively, Elucid and Woods weave together these lyrical flashes of systematic marginalization, criminality, and New York's dark underbelly, which is not new lyrical territory for these two given, but I do think both of them are approaching these topics more boldly than they were half a decade ago when they forged this duo. And certainly existing under the Trump administration has given them more material to work with. In his verses, Billy continues to be one of the most hilarious, witty, but also grim rappers that I know, saying things like, "Every live show, forget the lyric. 40 doing Tae-Bo. Who'd have guessed this be how I finished? To everyone who got caught, I'm there in spirit." He continues delivering these lyrics in this kind of casual but shouted delivery and flow. It's like he's the town crier if the town were Twin Peaks. And often in his verses, he'll go off on these weird lyrical diatribes that don't necessarily add up into a clear story, but they connect line to line in interesting ways. The perpetrator was a different shade of black, beat the case, said let him eat cake in his raps, service weapon in my face, all I could see was his lips chapped, wouldn't recognize him if I saw him today, chokehold slowly closed the airways, sunk in place, I can't stay, you built it on Indian graves, the lead character exclaims. It's funny because Billy's rap style sort of forces you to change perspectives again and again and again and like recontextualize what exactly he's trying to say with each single bar every single time because he's coming through with an off reference or he's rapping from another point of view. It's really an insane way of painting a picture. Also in his verses, he continues to come off like a man who just knows too much. Like if he were just throwing names out there in his rhymes and actually put more context into what he was saying, he'd literally be snitching on himself or other people. Like on the song Alternate Side Parking, where he brings up this line about getting into a car and people don't tell you the car is stolen until you're already in it and rolling, which for anybody who's been in a situation where someone else is kind of putting your livelihood in danger, that should put a pit in your stomach. A lot of the time it feels like Billy is trying to tell cautionary tales in a world that he constantly paints as being evil, or at least the world that he is surrounded by. And as I said before, that lyrical wit that he has, it's on full display on this album, as a lot of his one-liners on this record are hilarious, but like with his previous material, there's usually a very dark and grim reveal there to whatever that dark joke he is throwing out there, as he's exposing a lot of harsh realities that for most people are kind of out of sight, out of mind. A lot of things he says, in my opinion, have the effect of, I don't know, lifting a blanket or something only to find there's an intrusion of cockroaches underneath it scattering in every direction. And one of my favorite lyrics from him on this album actually comes toward the end of the record, as Billy says, "I found some people would rather die than cut you a slice of the pie." Now, Elucid is not without his own sense of humor, his universally true statements on this album. There's one spot on the track Black Garlic that stood out to me as he rants again and again, "Legalese is designed to overwhelm you. Legalese is designed to overwhelm you." As statistically speaking, it does seem like the legal system in a lot of ways is designed to disenfranchise the poor, the uneducated. Now, Elucid's rap style is different but complementary to Billy's in that it's pretty rapid fire, a little overwhelming. He's got some really dynamic flows, a raspy voice, and a lot of word choices that just kind of feel like dictionary deep cuts. Things that I think people who are like, let's say, Aesop Rock fans will really enjoy. But on this album, Elucid lays a lot of very heavy political themes into his verses, as throughout this record, he is not shy at all when it comes to approaching racism, inequality, Trump, corrupt police. And he can get pretty existential too on some of the cuts here. Like one bar that stood out to me on the track Hunter is when he was rapping about speaking to an unframed sky, combined with just how atmospheric and open the instrumental on that track is. I think that line speaks a lot to the gigantic vastness that surrounds our insignificant existence on planet Earth. I also like the way he poetically put the lows of low wages on the track No Days Off. "Let me get your supervisor on the phone. Late stage capital shooting down the living wage. Caveman figure rational. Castles with eyes in the sky. Claiming both the proud and the wise. Normalize us with the fuck shit. The corporation they must trust. I'll get that for you, no rush." And as I said before, Elucid can be witty and humorous as well, like on the track Black Garlic. I absolutely love the tangent he goes off on with that track as he's kind of spitting about internet hip-hop culture, bringing up DJ Vlad doing what, like white-splaining to disinterested black women. Then he talks about Lil Wayne doing an acoustic cover of the song Sign of the Times. It just seems like an absurd parody. It's also fitting on this album at one point that he drops a reference to Halfway Crooks, because as I was listening through to this record, I did get almost like a Mobb Deep vibe at points. Like Woods and Elucid are this totally underground, abstract, like version of Mobb Deep in a way. And oddly enough, there's also something about this record that kind of makes me want to compare it to the recent Travis Scott record Astroworld. But if the production's psychedelic tendencies were meant more to put you in a state of depression than put you in a state of euphoria. Not to mention also that Armand Hammer actually has something of substance to say. But I think both albums are comparably experimental, intoxicating, and also feature a lot of interesting musical transitions within songs or from track to track. Knowing their outsider status and their feelings about their artistic process, I'm not exactly sure if Elucid and Woods would appreciate that comparison, but I don't know, it's just a vibe that I caught. Overall, I think this is a great record. I loved it. I really enjoyed it. I think it's one of the best abstract hip-hop records I've heard in a while. At its best, this thing is amazingly produced, texturally deep, super stimulating, and lyrically layered like an onion. There's tons of replay value in this record, and it just reveals more and more and more with each listen. At its worst, though, this album can be really indirect to the point where it can feel a little unengaging. It can also be really impenetrable. So if you're a newcomer to abstract hip-hop or Armand Hammer in general, don't necessarily come into this album expecting to just get it right off the bat. The album is also super self-indulgent, which may turn some people off, and there are a handful of short, like 2-minute cuts on here, which I think could have used a bit more structure just to leave a stronger impact, but really there was nothing on this album I thought was so bad it was worth skipping. Even the most underwhelming or lackluster moments on this thing feature some great lyrics or some super creative production. The narrative and the flow of the entire album isn't really all that strong, as it does feel pretty random at points. The finishing track is kind of despondent and does give a real sense of finality though, but despite lacking in those departments, Billy and Elucid do a good job of creating a nice momentum track to track, as there are some quick and interesting transitions from one song to another, making the listening experience with this album kind of seamless. Feeling a decent 2-strong 8 on this one. Transition. Have you given this album a listen? Did you love it? Did you hate it? What would you rate it? You're the best. You're the best. What should I review next? Hit the like if you like. Please subscribe and please don't cry. Hit the bell as well. Over here next to my head is another video that you can check out. Hit that up, or the link to subscribe to the channel. Anthony Fantano, Billy Woods, Elucid, Armand Hammer, forever.